PL200 Microsoft Power Platform Functional Consultant, latest exam questions and answers, 2024. Question: You are configuring a Canvas app. The app requires a business rule to perform validation. You need to configure the business rule action. Options: A. Hide column. B. Disable column. C. Set column value. D. Show recommendation. The correct answer is C. Set column value. Explanation: When performing validation in a Canvas app using a business rule, the set column value action allows you to automatically correct or apply a specific value to a column based on conditions. This ensures data integrity and provides a straightforward way to enforce validation rules. Why the other options are incorrect. A. Hide column. This action hides a column from the user interface but does not enforce validation. B. Disable column. This action prevents users from editing a column but does not perform validation. D. Show recommendation. This action provides guidance to users but does not actively validate or enforce rules. Summary: To perform validation in a Canvas app using a business rule, use the set column value action to enforce specific conditions and ensure accurate data entry. Question: You are building an approval cloud flow for a company to assign tasks. The company plans to allow 5 days for task assignments. If an assignee does not complete an assigned task within the 5 days, the task must be assigned to the assignee's manager. You need to configure the cloud flow. Options: Select all that apply. A. Set the wait for an approval action timeout setting to P5D. B. Add a delay action and set it to pause at 120 hours. C. Use a parallel branch action. D. Configure a start an approval action to run after the previous action times out. E. Use a condition control to verify whether the task is completed within the expected time. F. Use a switch control to assign tasks based on roles. The correct answer is A. Set the wait for an approval action timeout setting to P5D. C. Use a parallel branch action. D. Configure a start an approval action to run after the previous action times out. Explanation: A. Set the wait for an approval action timeout setting to P5D. This configures the timeout for the approval process, ensuring it waits exactly 5 days before triggering the next action. C. Use a parallel branch action. A parallel branch can be used to monitor the task while the approval process runs. One branch checks for task completion while the other manages the timeout process. 3. D. Configure a start an approval action to run after the previous action times out. This action ensures that if the timeout occurs, the task is reassigned to the manager for completion. Why the other options are incorrect. B. Add a delay action and set it to pause at 120 hours. The delay action is redundant when the wait for an approval action includes a timeout setting. E. Use a condition control to verify whether the task is completed within the expected time. This is unnecessary in the context of using a parallel branch to manage task completion and reassignment logic. F. Use a switch control to assign tasks based on roles. While switch controls are useful for conditional role-based logic, this scenario does not require role-based assignments. Summary: The correct combination of actions is A, C, and D to implement the approval flow effectively with task reassignment after the timeout. Question: A company uses Microsoft Dynamics 365 Sales to manage orders. When a user fulfills an order in Dynamics 365 Sales, the accounting system must update automatically. If the update fails, the system must display a message to the user in the order form. You need to set up the automation. Options: A. Automated cloud flow. B. Scheduled cloud flow. C. Asynchronous classic workflow. D. Synchronous classic workflow. The correct answer is D. Synchronous classic workflow. Explanation. A synchronous classic workflow executes immediately when the triggering event occurs, in this case, fulfilling an order. Since it operates in real time, it can provide immediate feedback to the user, such as displaying an error message on the order form if the update to the accounting system fails. Why the other options are incorrect. A. Automated cloud flow. While cloud flows can automate processes, they operate asynchronously and cannot provide real-time feedback to users on the Dynamics 365 sales order form. B. Scheduled cloud flow. This type of flow runs on a schedule and is not triggered by specific user actions, making it unsuitable for this requirement. C. Asynchronous classic workflow. Asynchronous workflows run in the background and do not provide immediate feedback to users. This makes them unsuitable for displaying real-time error messages. Summary. To ensure that the accounting system updates automatically and displays an error message on the order form if the update fails, you should use a synchronous classic workflow. Question. You manage a business rule that is added to a business process flow. You need to ensure that the business rule is configured to run on the server side. What should you use as the business rule scope? Options. A. All forms. B. Table. C. Quick view form. D. Main form. The correct answer is table. Explanation. To ensure that a business rule runs on the server side, the scope must be set to table. When the scope is set to table, the business rule applies at the database level and runs server side, regardless of whether the data is modified through a form, an API, or another process. Why the other options are incorrect. A. All forms. This scope applies the business rule to all client-side forms, but does not enable server-side execution. C. Quick view form. This scope applies the business rule to quick view forms, which are client-side only. D. Main form. This scope applies the business rule to the main form and is also client-side. Summary. To configure a business rule to execute on the server side, set the scope to table. Question. You are building a business process flow. One step requires manager approval for users. You need to design a cloud flow to manage the approval. Options. A. Use a manual trigger in the cloud flow. B. Create the cloud flow in a default environment. C. Add the cloud flow as a separate stage in a business process flow. D. Add the cloud flow to an existing stage by using a flow step component. Correct answer is D. Add the cloud flow to an existing stage by using a flow step component. Explanation. To integrate an approval process into a business process flow, you can use a flow step component. This allows you to embed a cloud flow directly into an existing stage of the business process flow, enabling seamless execution of the approval process as part of the workflow. Why the other options are incorrect. A. Use a manual trigger in the cloud flow. A manual trigger requires user input to start the flow, which does not align with automating the process as part of a business process flow. B. Create the cloud flow in a default environment. While this determines where the cloud flow is stored, it does not define how it is integrated with the business process flow. C. Add the cloud flow as a separate stage in a business process flow. Cloud flows cannot be added as separate stages in a business process flow. They must be embedded within an existing stage using a flow step component. Summary: to manage approvals in a business process flow, embed the cloud flow within an existing stage by using a flow step component. This ensures the approval process is integrated into the overall workflow. The correct answer is D. Question: you are developing a business process flow. You need to trigger a workflow on demand inside the business process flow to create a new account. Which component should you use? Option stage, B, condition, C, data step, D, action step. The correct answer is D, action step. Explanation: an action step in a business process flow allows you to trigger workflows or actions on demand. In this case, you can use the action step to trigger a workflow that creates a new account during the process flow. Why the other options are incorrect. A stage. A stage is a broader component that groups steps and represents phases in the business process flow. It does not trigger workflows directly. B. Condition. A condition determines the path of the process based on defined criteria, but it does not execute workflows. C. Data step. A data step is used to collect or display information but cannot trigger workflows or actions. Summary: to trigger a workflow on demand inside a business process flow, use an action step, which is specifically designed for executing workflows or custom actions. Question: you want to configure logs to automatically delete as workflows complete. You plan to use a bulk delete job that runs on a recurring schedule. You need to set the recurring schedule. Options: A, minute, B, hour, C, day, D, week, E, month. The correct answer is C. Explanation: when setting up a bulk delete job in Microsoft Dynamics 365, you can configure it to run on a daily recurring schedule. While the bulk delete job supports intervals like day, week, and month, it does not support minute or hour level recurrence. Why the other options are incorrect. A, minute. Bulk delete jobs cannot be configured to run on a per minute basis. B, hour. Hourly frequency is not supported for bulk delete jobs. While weekly recurrence is an option, it does not meet the typical requirement of daily log deletion. E, month. Monthly recurrence is an option, but it is not as commonly used for managing logs as a daily schedule. For log cleanup using a bulk delete job, configure the schedule to run daily. This ensures timely removal of completed workflow logs without overloading the system. Question: you manage a Microsoft Dataverse instance. You must prevent the creation of a new account in the accounts table. You need to use custom logic on a real-time basis to meet the requirement. Options: A, desktop flow, B, cloud flow, C, classic workflow, D, business process flow. The correct answer is C, classic workflow. Explanation: to prevent the creation of a new account in the accounts table in real time, you can use a classic workflow configured to run in real-time mode. This allows you to apply custom logic that stops the creation of accounts immediately as the operation is triggered. Why the other options are incorrect. A, desktop flow. Desktop flows are used for robotic process automation, RPA, and are not designed to enforce real-time logic within Dataverse. B, cloud flow. Cloud flows operate asynchronously and cannot enforce real-time logic to prevent actions such as record creation. D, business process flow. Business process flows guide users through a process but do not enforce logic for preventing record creation. Summary: To apply custom logic on a real-time basis and prevent the creation of a new account, use a classic workflow configured for real-time execution. Question: You are developing a classic workflow for expense approval. You need to ensure that the workflow pauses at a step until the criteria defined by the condition is met and then starts automatically when the condition is met. You need to configure the workflow. Options: A. Conditional branch. B. Wait condition. C. Check condition. D. Default action. The correct answer is B. Wait condition. Explanation: a wait condition in a classic workflow allows the workflow to pause at a specific step until the criteria defined by the condition are met. Once the condition is satisfied, the workflow resumes execution automatically. This is ideal for scenarios like expense approval, where the workflow must wait for specific conditions to be fulfilled. Why the other options are incorrect. A. Conditional branch. A conditional branch is used to define different paths in the workflow based on a condition, but it does not pause the workflow. C. Check condition. A check condition evaluates criteria but does not cause the workflow to pause or wait for the criteria to be met. D. Default action. Default actions are used for setting predefined behaviors and do not handle conditional waiting. Summary: to configure a classic workflow to pause until a condition is met and then resume automatically, use a wait condition. Question: a company has an automated flow that triggers when an item is created in a SharePoint list. The list has a column named status. You need to configure the flow to run only when the item status equals approved. What should you configure in the trigger? Options: A. Split on. B. Custom tracking ID. C. Trigger condition. D. Concurrency control. The correct answer is C. Trigger condition. Explanation: a trigger condition allows you to specify the conditions under which the flow should run. In this case, you can configure a trigger condition to ensure the flow only runs when the status column equals approved. This optimizes the flow by preventing it from triggering unnecessarily for other statuses. Why the other options are incorrect. A. Split on. This is used to process multiple records in parallel, not to control when a flow triggers. B. Custom tracking ID. This is used for assigning custom identifiers to track flow runs, not for setting conditions on triggers. D. Concurrency control. This controls how many flow runs can execute concurrently, but does not filter trigger conditions. Summary: to configure the flow to run on only when the status equals approved, use a trigger condition in the trigger configuration. Question: a company configures a research business unit in Dataverse. The business unit has users who own contacts in the contacts table. You use the Dataverse trigger in a Cloudflow to access the contacts table. You need to ensure that the flow triggers only if users in the research business unit modify the contacts. Which two actions should you perform? Options: select all that apply. A. Set the scope to user. B. Set the scope to organization. C. Set the scope to business unit. D. Set the change type to modified. E. Set the change type to added or modified or deleted. The correct answers are C. Set the scope to business unit. D. Set the change type to modified. Explanation: 1. Set the scope to business unit. This ensures that the Cloudflow triggers only for actions performed by users within the specified business unit. In this case, the research business unit. The scope restricts triggering to changes made by users belonging to the selected business unit. 2. Set the change type to modified. Since the requirement is to trigger the flow only when contacts are MOSH modified, you must set the change type to modified. Why the other options are incorrect? A. Set the scope to user. This limits the trigger to changes made by a single specific user, which does not meet the requirement. B. Set the scope to organization. This triggers the flow for changes made across the entire organization, which is too broad for the given requirement. E. Set the change type to added or modified or deleted. While this allows triggering for all change types, the requirement specifically states triggering on certain modifications only. Summary. To configure the flow to trigger only when users in the research business unit modify contacts, set the scope to business unit, and the change type to modified. Question. You develop a low-code automated plugin that runs on a Dataverse table named Project. The project table has a due date column. You need to ensure that a project record cannot be modified if the project due date has passed. Which formula should you use in the plugin? Options. A. If due date today, error, the due date has passed. B. If this record due date today, valid true, valid false. C. If due date today, valid true, valid false. D. If this record due date today, error, the due date has passed. The correct answer is D. If this record due date today, error, the due date has passed. Explanation. This record is used to reference the current record being processed in the plugin. The formula checks if the due date for the current record, this record due date, is earlier than today's date, today. If the condition is true, an error is triggered using the error function, preventing modifications to the record. TAC, why the other options are incorrect. A. If due date today, error, the due date has passed. This formula does not use this record, so it does not explicitly reference the current record. B. If this record, due date today, valid true, valid false. This formula returns a validity object but does not trigger an error or prevent modifications. C. If due date today, valid true. Like option A, this does not use this record and only returns a validity object without enforcing a restriction. Summary. To prevent a project record from being modified when the due date has passed, use if this record dot due date today, error, the due date has passed, in the plugin. This ensures proper referencing and enforces the restriction. Question. A company uses Canvas apps to add customers to the Dataverse table named Customers. The company requires a business rule to enforce standard rules for all the Canvas apps. You need to ensure that the text NA is added to empty columns when the form is submitted. Which scope should you use for the business rule? Options. A. All forms. B. Entity. C. Information. D. Main. The correct answer is B. Entity. Explanation. When the scope of a business rule is set to entity, it applies to the table at the server level, ensuring that the rule is enforced regardless of how the data is submitted, e.g. through Canvas apps, model-driven apps, or API. This ensures the business rule runs for all Canvas apps that interact with the customers table. In this case, setting the entity scope ensures that the text NA is added to empty columns when the form is submitted, regardless of the app or method used to create or update records. Why the other options are incorrect? A. All forms. This scope applies the rule to all client-side forms, but does not enforce the rule at the table level for other entry methods like Canvas apps. C. Information. This is not a valid scope for business rules. D. Main. This scope applies the rule to the main form only, not across the entire table or through server-side logic. Summary. To enforce the business rule for all Canvas apps and ensure NA is added to empty columns on submission, set the scope of the business rule to Entity. Question. You are developing a model-driven app to add a new account to the Dataverse Accounts table. You need to prompt users with a recommendation if the revenue entered is greater than USD 5 million. What should you use to generate the prompt? Options. A. Business rule. B. Business process flow. C. Classic workflow. D. Power automate flow. The correct answer is A. Business rule. Explanation. A business rule can be configured in Dataverse to provide real-time recommendations or validations on forms in a model-driven app. You can use a business rule to check if the revenue is greater than USD 5 million and display a recommendation directly on the form. Recommendations in business rules are specifically designed for scenarios like this, where user guidance is needed based on the input. Why the other options are incorrect. B. Business process flow. Business process flows guide users through specific stages of a process, but do not display recommendations on a form. C. Classic workflow. Classic workflows operate in the background and cannot provide real-time recommendations or validations. D. Power automate flow. Power automate flows are designed for automation across systems, but are not suitable for real-time recommendations within a model-driven app form. Summary. To prompt users with a recommendation if revenue is greater than USD 5 million, use a business rule configured with a recommendation action. Question. You create a Canvas app within a solution. You require a Microsoft Power Automate flow that is triggered from within the Canvas app. You need to create the Power Automate flow. Options. A. Instant Cloud Flow under My Flows in the Power Automate Portal Designer. B. Automated Cloud Flow inside the solution. C. Instant Cloud Flow inside the solution. D. Desktop Flow inside the solution. The correct answer is C. Instant Cloud Flow inside the solution. Explanation. An instant cloud flow is designed to be triggered manually, such as from a button in a Canvas app. Since the Canvas app is part of a solution, the corresponding Power Automate flow must also be created inside the solution to ensure proper integration, manageability, and deployment. Why the other options are incorrect. A. Instant Cloud Flow under My Flows in the Power Automate Portal Designer. While this creates an instant flow, it will not be part of the solution, making it harder to integrate and manage with the Canvas app. B. Automated Cloud Flow inside the solution. Automated flows are triggered automatically by an event, e.g. record creation, not manually from a Canvas app. D. Desktop Flow inside the solution. Desktop flows are used for robotic process automation, RPA, and are not triggered from Canvas apps. To trigger a Power Automate flow manually from a Canvas app within a solution, you must create an instant cloud flow inside the solution.